So we've talked about the rational approach with the spreadsheet, the behavior approach, and the practical approach. So it turns out a lot of people use all three of these, right? It's a hybrid approach. I'm going to use a rational approach, but then at the end, like the guys deciding where to refurbish the ships, what shipyard to use. And then they apply the political picture to it, and then some practical approach with risk avoidance, right? And that's very common. Right, so usually you start with the rational, and then you start applying fudge factors, a little bit of spin here and there, right? And that's what comes from experience at work and talking to your boss about it, and clever people and people that are in tune to the office politics and all that. And quite frankly, I strongly advise that. Sometimes I come from the engineering world where the engineers fall in love with the numbers and the rational decision. They say this is the right decision no matter what. So in the spreadsheet with the used cars, they would say buy the Camry no matter what, even though the Camry was only 1 point better than the other car. And if one of those numbers changed just a little bit, you're going to get a different answer. And then where did those numbers come from? They were estimates by somebody looking at the car. So you got to keep that in mind, that even though the Camry was the best choice, there was another car or two very close to them, and it probably deserves a second look. Right? You don't have to buy. It's not do or die with that car. Right, so here's a look at a flow chart where they're sort of the same thing as before. Identify the problem, develop adequate criteria. Don't forget, adequate criteria means to weight them, right? Some are more important than others. Right? And then after the criteria, then you generate alternatives, and then you come up with a rational choice. But then you start applying other things to it, like some political spin and maybe some risk analysis and those type things. Right? Very common, very appropriate to do in an environment. I should back up this one slide. There's a good point here in the bottom of the slide. Research has shown that speed in decision making is not indicative of the consideration of fewer alternatives by the manager. So just because we have to make a fast decision doesn't always mean we generate fewer alternatives. On the other hand, if it's a slow decision, sometimes we don't like to spend the search time, the time and effort of generating more information and more alternatives. So we don't. Like if we're hiring somebody, I find a couple people I like, I'll bring them in, interview them, and I don't search more and more. And my advice there is think about how much time you have to spend on this decision, and you should put the appropriate amount of time into it. So if you have more time, maybe you should take it. But just because you have more time is not any reason to take more time. Maybe it's not worth it. You have something that's acceptable, it's right, satisfying, so off you go. All right, other factors affecting group decision making is things like polarization, groupthink, group problem solving. We'll talk about those a little bit. So group polarization, tendency for groups average post-discussion attitudes to be more extreme than pre-discussion. So you sort of, I'm 60% this way and 40% that way. The other person's 60%, 40%, and so forth. But we all get together and we all talk about this way. So we go with the 60%, the one we're 60% confident instead of 40%, which is great. But at the end, you'll find people's attitudes will be much more into all or nothing, right? We pick this one, it's clearly the best. So by supporting each other, they firm up their opinion, and then we have persuasive arguments convincing the weaker supporters this is the way to go. So the group as a whole comes out of there much more convinced this is the way to go. So what you'll find is people wishy-washy walking in, and they're not wishy-washy when they're coming out. They know this is the way to go. Typically when I see like group committees interviewing people to hire, they'll be that way. I'm not sure if we should pick person A or person B, and they come out of the meeting, oh yeah, it's person B all the way. Got to have them. A is no good, we got to have them. So it's amazing how that turns around. All right, groupthink I talked about in a chapter or two ago, but let me go through it again because it's worth it. Right? It's motive thinking where the members of the group want to be so cohesive and so much for group unity that they forget to make sure they come up with a really good course of action. Maybe not the best, but an appropriate course of action. And you can do things like I used the example where they launched the Space Shuttle Challenger when it was too cold. It blows up right after takeoff and it kills everybody on board. I think it was 7 people. All right, so the effects on groupthink. Consideration of a focus on fewer alternatives. That's certainly part of it. A failure to perceive risk or drawbacks of this choice, like, shooting a spaceship off when it's too cold and the seals aren't working. Rejection of expert opinions. yeah, we know the experts said this, but we think it'll be okay. Why do you think it'll be okay? Because we do. We're all in this room here, and the space shuttle one was kind of interesting because get this, they literally had a room of rocket scientists. They literally had a room of rocket scientists, right? And they said, and they came to said, how can we all be wrong if we all think it's okay to launch and it should be okay to launch? Even though they had other rocket scientists and other engineers faxing them information that said, don't do it and here's why. It must have been terribly frustrating for the engineers at the supply company that made the seals and made the big solid boosters, those big Roman candles on the side of the space shuttle. It was terribly frustrating for those guys to say, don't do this, it's extremely dangerous, and then the bosses did it anyway, and then kaboom, people died. So here we have ignoring the potential for setbacks. Yeah, no kidding, right? So that's a bit of a setback when you blow up your spaceship on live national TV. Not so good. So we talked about, okay, so that's group think. How do you not do this? Because it can be really bad. So conditions favoring group think: strong group cohesiveness. So you should make sure it's okay for people to say, I disagree. Let's get more data. Let's figure this out. Leader's promotion of a preferred solution. So the leader should not be the one who leads the suggesting of possible solutions, because the followers in the group would just say, yeah, what the boss said, right? And that's no good. I've learned from the military, by the way they do this, like in the Navy, is that they're not like a submarine where it has a small number of officers. So they're sitting there and they're having a meeting. What should we do, right? The officers are getting together and there's a non-programmed decision. What should we do? And so they want to throw out ideas and sort of analyze them, different alternatives, and analyze them, but based on the criteria that they've been giving, the confines of their mission, the idea of protecting the ship and crew, and all of that. So the captain, if the captain said, I think we should do this, what are the other people going to do? It would take a very confident, very senior person to say, no, captain, you're wrong, do this. So the way they do it is they start with the least experienced person at the table, the junior officer, and say, all right, you sonny boy, what do you think? And they make him go first. And so he has to say his opinion. We could do this, we could do this, we could do this, this is a plus or minus. And then he goes to the next experienced person. So the next experienced person doesn't feel like they have to agree with the rookie, right? So they will give their honest opinion. Then they go to the next experienced person who also doesn't feel a lot of pressure to agree with him. Although if the first two agree, they're going to feel certainly more pressure. Right? And then it goes around to the captain, who doesn't have to agree with anybody, right? He's the captain of the ship, right? So what he says goes, or she says goes. So they say, all right, I thank you for your inputs. Right, we've thought them over, and here's how we're going to go. Because this is the Navy. This is not democracy, right? They don't vote. But it's okay to ask people's opinions and suggestions and all of that. That's exactly what they do. So I thought the idea of making the least experienced, the lowest ranking people go first was an excellent idea. And so when I had supervisors working for me, that's exactly what I would do. One guy asked me, why do I always got to go first? And I said, I'll tell you, because you're the last one here. You're the least experienced person. And so if the guy who's got 20 more years of experience said something, you're going to be very tempted, anybody would, to agree with him. Therefore, you go first, so you don't know his opinion. He, on the other hand, has 20 years experience. He doesn't really care what you think. He has his own opinions for him before he gets there, and he's more than happy to tell them to me. All right, and then I get to decide. But hopefully the group comes to a consensus, but if not, it drops on me. All right, then over here we have this box, insulation of groups from experts' opinion, right? Again, we had experts from Morton Thiokol is the name of the company that make the big solid fuel boosters for the space shuttle. They were literally faxing them test information saying these seals don't work when they're 32 degrees or less. And the experts were trying not to look at it. They were making excuses for it. They were trying. That was the one piece of information that clearly said, don't do it, and here's why. And they were doing what they can to minimize that information, to hide it from each other, to not make it visible, because they were behind. They should have launched a couple times. They had canceled other launches. You know, the Earth has to be in the right place at the right time for these launches and all that. So it's not like you're driving to the grocery store, right? You can't do it just any time. So they're trying to get the satellite into orbit. So it's a big deal to them that they got this thing off. So they were feeling lots and lots of pressure to make this thing happen. Right, and here's a quick little schematic of, the time pressure is a part of it, the leadership styles, all part of it goes into this decision making when you have groupthink.